we are going to speak about mobility as a service. And I'm delighted that Jacob and Tommaso asked me to lead this roundtable on Anthropolis Chaire vision on MaaS. So perhaps I could define what usually we ask about the question of mobility as a service.
Let me interrupt you, Isabelle, sorry. You are in presenter mode. If you want, go, because we see then like the notes, but there are no notes. But, if you want to go back.
Yeah. Oops.
And then en bas, à droite, dans les presenters, the little icon to, yeah.
You don't see the...
Oh, if not, en haut, en mode lecture, tu peux cliquer là, en haut à gauche. Tu vois mode lecture?
No.
En bas, droite.
Oops. No, it's not this one. Okay.
Yeah. That one. Yeah, that's perfect.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks. So usually what we call MaaS is the integration of an access to different transport services in one single digital mobility platform. And for the usual presentation we have about MaaS, we could just present and comment this slide. Services could be proposed for collective use or individual use. And we can cross this vision of mobility of MaaS services with the questions of who is going to offer these services. Perhaps it's a public access or private access. And for all these services that could be proposed with this platform, we can just cross a lot of type of kind of services, public transport, so as car sharing or pedestrian ways. So the question we have is that MaaS offers different services on the value chain, considering in producing the most various transport services possible. So we are very excited to propose our vision about MaaS, because you see there is a lot of options to describe the MaaS services. So in this roundtable, we are going to propose various vision of MaaS. And I hope that the roundtable, which groups speakers who come from different horizons, are going to propose for yourself and present yourself a vision of what could be or what should be the MaaS. So first, I will ask each speaker giving his personal approaches regarding MaaS, and perhaps to answer this question, what is the MaaS configuration? What is the MaaS configuration that might prove to be the most successful from your perspective? And perhaps we could ask first to Guy, if you could begin. Guy Fournier.
Yes, thank you very much, Isabelle. Let me first introduce myself. So my name is Guy Fournier. I'm a Frenchman. I'm a professor in Germany at Pforzheim University and also professor at Centralesupélec. So I'm currently responsible at one of the board member of H2020 project, which aim is to validate automated vehicles for public transportation. It's one of the biggest European projects with a budget of about 20 million. And we are taking care about the impact of automated vehicles in the cities. And so we are also, so one option of these use case is to use MaaS as to integrate automated vehicle in a MaaS in a city. And this is probably, to my opinion, the most effective way to implement automated vehicles. So to give a response to your question, Isabelle, I share your point of view. And but we have to, speaking about the definition, we have to distinguish between public MaaS. So this is typically what is supported by the UTP, what you have showed us before. And we have also private MaaS, and then the way to serve the general interest is probably to use the complementarity between public and private transport, and thus to have a mixture of public and private MaaS. So this is my point of view to this approach.
Thank you, Guy. Perhaps Julia, could you proceed presenting yourself, please?
Yeah. So I will just quickly share one slide. Do you see my slide?
Yeah.
So, yeah, my name is Julia Janke. I'm a researcher at ENPC at the University in Paris. And we have a research project, a 2 years research project with the RATP, the public transport provider. And in this research project, we are focusing on the diffusion of this new mobility tool, MaaS, its usage, the role of different stakeholders to try to influence the development of MaaS. And in this project, we have different angles what we analyze. And one is we do a worldwide census of MaaS platforms, and therefore we had to define precisely what MaaS means to us. So for us, MaaS is a user-oriented mobility service that combines multiple transport modes and offers payment and booking via platform one-stop shop. So what does it actually mean, this multimodal integration that we think is necessary in order to be a MaaS? So it is a combination of different transport modes. So either you have public transport with any other transport mode, or you have a combination of kind of bike sharing with car sharing and intermediate transport options. So that means taxis or transport on demand. So we did this definition based on user attributes. So really the user is in the focus, and having this option to actually see the prices and actually also pay for these services in the app or on the website. And our angle looking at MaaS is really, can it be a regulatory tool? So how does legislation facilitates or jeopardize MaaS diffusion? How do different actors collaborate, and how can MaaS be used as a tool for transport policy? And just to respond to your last question, so what would be like a successful vision of MaaS? So I think that really depends on the context. So we will see in big cities, probably competing MaaS models, depending also on the region, with B2G and B2C strategies, whereas in smaller cities and rural environments, regional environments, we will more see like B2G models. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. And perhaps Marc, if you want to present yourself, and especially the vision you have about a successful MaaS.
Okay, so thank you, Isabelle. I'm Marc Alochet. I'm engineer. I've done all my career in the industry, and more specifically, more than 30 years with a French car maker, Renault, always in engineering division and much more focus on production engineering. At the end of 2017, I've joined the Center of Research Management at Ecole Polytechnique, and I'm now working on the new mobility systems. Regarding MaaS, as a citizen, I really feel concerned by the challenge of decarbonization. And if MaaS can offer some sustainable, efficient, and seamless means of road transportation, I'm very happy with that. But in this discussion, I will take the viewpoint of the automotive industry and discuss one of the three main concepts introduced by Isabelle, namely the value chain. The automotive industry is facing a very difficult momentum. This industry has been very resilient for more than 100 years because automakers rely on a strong dominant design, plays the role of integrator, hierarchically manage a value chain, and act as guarantors of quality and regulation compliance for end customers. How can this industry manage the emergence of case and MaaS, which are technological, societal, and usage breakthrough coming from outside its natural core business and its natural sphere of influence? The future of this industry is at stake. The incumbent automaker, no matter what we may read or hear about the strength of powerful newcomers like Tesla or NIO, are well on their way to overcoming the risk of electrification. With a no more than new-make strategy, they have integrated electrification system into the core business. They now face three major challenges: reducing cost, scaling up quickly, and securing supply. In doing so, they are doing what they have been effective at for decades. MaaS is a very different challenge, and the risk is losing the direct connection with your customers and the power of your brand. You are traveling with an airline, not Boeing or Airbus. If a mobility operator has the ability to expand globally, you will travel with that company and no longer care about the car which is used. The car that becomes a white good is probably the worst nightmare in this industry. So for me, the questioning is first about the ability of automakers to be key players in MaaS, and second, about which players are capable of driving such a transition to new mobility systems. That's done for the introduction.
Thank you, Marc. And perhaps Mariana, if you could proceed, and I would like you to present yourself and your vision of MaaS, and perhaps the vision of our guest, Gerpisa, who is Chaire Anthropolis on MaaS. What is its vision, please?
Thank you, Isabelle. Just a second while I'll share my screen. Is that okay? Can you see it? Good. So I'm very happy to be here representing the Chaire Anthropolis, which is a research chair linked to the IRT SystemX, a research institution and foundation in Centralesupélec, which is now a part of the Paris-Saclay University cluster in the south of Paris. My name is Mariana Reyes, and I'm a PhD student working on mobility as a service. So at Anthropolis, we are analyzing the futures of urban mobility, and our work aims to tackle the major challenges of urban life, such as reducing carbon emissions and improving quality of life in cities. So we focus on developing methods to design and optimize mobility systems and services, but always with a human-centered approach and a focus on sustainable objectives. So our research, let me change the slide. Yep. So our research explores three complementary topics, which are futures of mobility and urban life, mobility as a service, and the future of infrastructures. We approach mobility from different layers, and we see that MaaS is transforming the way we conceive and access mobility services, simplifying access for users while complexifying collaborative dynamics between the rest of the actors in the ecosystem. So zooming in the axis of the research topics we have at the chair, we have Axe 3, which is MaaS, and we build our approach to MaaS based on sustainable mobility as the global objective, and three specific focuses: value creation, governance, and innovation. So with this work, we intend to identify the points where governance dynamics and usage dynamics converge in the business models to ensure the sustainable creation, capture, and redistribution of value amongst all stakeholders of this new mobility ecosystem. So the revolution of MaaS, we believe that it will be the result of the integration of the technological innovations and the other strategies towards profounder behavioral shifts as new policies and recommendations emerge for modeling our future scenarios. So we have these assumptions that are based on our work definition that we built from an extensive literature review, which highlight MaaS as an innovation in mobility management that involves the integration of mobility services into one single digital platform, where the user-centric approach allows users to customize their trips, accessing and combining modes and specific resources that are available in their given territories. And that's a big important part that I'll go later. So in our definition, the role of the quality real-time information and incentives are central to catalyze the sustainable behavior we want from users' potential modal shift. So lastly, we consider MaaS as a tool, but a bit differently from like Julia mentioned, but as a tool towards sustainable mobility, where the shift in mobility practices should be reflected on individual, economical, social, and environmental gains. And lastly, we believe that MaaS has the potential to generate value, different types of value, from the stakeholders through the conception and adoption of clear co-creation mechanisms among the actors, including the users. This is why we see the process of value co-creation as a sort of feedback loop where innovation in MaaS catalyzes the transformation of business models while pushing governance dynamics to adapt to these innovations. So both governance dynamics and business models are restructured by other innovations surrounding MaaS and enhanced by policy and regulation. So from my perspective, the success of MaaS solutions will depend to a great extent on the governance dynamics created towards mutualized co-production goals, and also to the capacity to adapt to specific territories for each actor. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Mariana. So, as you see, faced to such various topics, we have chosen one side to present this roundtable, and I would like to that the speakers explain what is the individual interest to adopt MaaS, and perhaps especially in the context of post or present COVID. I propose that all of you present your vision, and at the end of this round, suggest that I speak about speakers and public and attendees, ask some question. I think we could have some 15 minutes available to exchange with this question. So from your perspective, what types of what kind of value MaaS creates for users in the context of perhaps post-COVID era? Perhaps if Julia, you can begin in this presentation, please.
Yeah, thank you, Isabelle. What types of value can MaaS create for the user, particularly in COVID times and post-COVID times? So first, I think MaaS is based on real-time information. So it shows you availability of modes and transport services in real time. So everything, of course, during COVID, the COVID crisis, people were very afraid of crowding. So vehicle occupancy could be valuable information for users, as well as really availability of modes, so that travel times and waiting times on in stations could be reduced. From transport operator perspective, public transport operator perspective, the COVID crisis really accelerated the digitalization of payment and ticketing systems. So that was a big boost for normally taking really 1 year or several months, and then in just several months, then the PT operators succeeded in providing digital payment and ticketing, I think, which facilitates for the user traveling. But you know, like in the COVID crisis, the public transport really decreased a lot, about like at 60% at their normal pre-COVID ridership level. So PT ridership really decreased a lot, and people, users were more orientated towards individual modes like car sharing, of course, the personal car sharing, bike sharing, car rental, which means long-term, more longer term. When I speak of car sharing, I mean also that you rent a car just below 1 day, and car rental is more for longer rental purposes. And these modes particularly profited from this COVID crisis. And when I came now from my angle, so which is kind of a regulatory perspective, and of course we want people still using public transport and leave their personal car at home. MaaS can be really an opportunity to integrate these other modes to provide the best services for the users. So PT operators may see an opportunity to better integrate the services like car sharing, bike rental into their general offer, so that people are re-attracted back to using public transport. So when we now see congestion is taking up, and for some parts, MaaS public transport systems are just so efficient in terms of travel time savings that people really try to combine different modes. And therefore, I think it's really important to include car services, even in public MaaS systems. So to really incentivize car users to leave their car at park and ride stations, incentivize them with combined offers, include disturbances for them as well. So it's, I think this is really important. So when I came to maybe the last aspect is whether maybe the COVID delays or fosters MaaS development. So it really depends. So of course, PT ridership broke down during, public transport ridership broke down during the COVID crisis, which decreases public finances to finance the public system. So it all depends whether public transport authorities are willing to invest in this tool, in this MaaS mobility as a service, and are willing, and that would be regionally quite different. So I think in Europe, in France, in Germany, in Austria, we will still see willingness to invest in MaaS tools. In the US, it's a different story. I have a different approach and focus. And for others, so that was for public transport operators in the public authority side. So for others like platform operators, we see that Uber really increased its delivery and actually has does his benefit and profits are generated by delivery services. But they, in addition, now what we see in the market is they add new mobility services in their apps as well, like public transport. Information is now available, and in some US cities, you can even buy your ticket, your public transport ticket. So these are private actors that also are interested in MaaS developments that are quite interesting to investigate as well, and that may profit differently from the COVID crisis than PT operators. So yeah, maybe just a last point. So I think what now, due to the COVID crisis or also post-COVID crisis, which even gets more important, is business-to-business MaaS project. So that means MaaS that is offered to enterprises either to better operate and manage their business travel or their commuting of their employees. And so I think that all depends, of course, which behavior will prevail. But we will see that people will work more from home. They will travel less for business purposes. They will have more flexible, more different travel behavior than previously. So it will depend, like, how will the firms and enterprises respond to these new needs of their employees. And one thing is that the company car is of course costly. Then we see a lot of transport policies that offer mobility budgets to enterprises to better manage the mobility of their own employees. And enterprise can really benefit from tax reduction, etc., incentives to provide such mobility services. And that clearly favors business to business or business to consumer MaaS development. And yeah, that would be quite interesting to see. So that's some of my ideas.
Thank you, Julia. It's very interesting. And perhaps, Guy, in your opinion, what do you think about the consequences, or do you think that COVID is going to accelerate or delay the MaaS development?
I would like first to share that the opinion with Julia, so I'm sharing the opinion. Now, first to give an answer to the first question about the value. So I think that the added value is that we can have for the first time through digitalization a customer citizen-centric approach of different means of transport. And this improves a lot the value of the transport. This makes possible to have individualized public transport, and this makes it also more inclusive and also more affordable because you can use better the available resources. Then the second point about your first question is about automated vehicles. So you know that I'm working on a project where we are thinking about how to integrate the best automated minibuses in a city. And this could be, of course, a game changer. And why this could be a game changer? First, because it could provide the first and the last mile. It could be something like a mobility gap filler. So it could be a stabilizer to compensate at any time and anywhere deficiencies of transport systems. And it could be also a catalyst to citizen trust into ITS. So these are the so-called intelligent transport systems. So this is more than MaaS. And so to my opinion, personally, to give a response to COVID, yes, it can be a problem to have additional invests for COVID because the stakeholder have perhaps less money to invest in the future. But on the other side, I think if you would like to have sustainable mobility in cities, and if you would like to satisfy better the mobility needs of the citizens and to have a citizen-centric approach, I think that the framework and in particular the governance should change, and we have to change the rule to make MaaS possible for the future.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps Marc, if you want to present your thoughts about this question too.
Yeah, so to start with values, I think that the key challenges of MaaS and as of any mobility system of the future is how does it contribute to fix almost simultaneously 3 issues: pollution, congestion, and casualties. In addition, as a consequence of the COVID-19, how does it contribute to provide healthy transportation conditions without risk of contagion? As demonstrated during the COVID-19 lockdown periods, congestion, pollution, and casualties have more or less decreased because the traffic has been reduced. Therefore, it would be pretty easy to say an efficient MaaS must reduce the number of vehicles on the road, because obviously transport needs are not solved in the same way depending on where one lives, large metropolitan centers, suburban or rural areas. In the latter case, the private car will probably remain the best solution for a long time to come, provided that residents still have the ability to drive safely. And when I say that, I refer to presentation in the previous parallel session about aging people driving in rural areas in Japan. Another point is that my strong conviction is that mobility can no longer be an issue whose solutions are left to private companies, whatever their origin. Automaker, tech company, mobility operator, to name but a few. Just keep in mind that the introduction of Uber has led to an increase in traffic in New York and a reduction of the average speed of vehicles. Transportation issues become so critical that public authorities have to take the lead. Of course, public authorities can and must get support from private companies in designing and operating mobility services. And public-private partnership is a well-known tool to do that if 2 conditions are met. The first one is that public authorities must greatly enhance their competencies in designing mobility services. I guess we all have in mind the example of Oslo, where the incentive for using EVs are so high that both the number of EVs and congestion have augmented. And second point, the capacity of financing the huge level of requested CapEx is not only provided by private companies, which is a very critical issue for public authorities in general, and obviously it has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. COVID-19, whether we want it or not, is part of this global picture. However, the ability to shape territorial ecosystem aimed at building effective mobility system to combat pollution, congestion, and accident is, in my opinion, the real key to success.
Thank you for this wide presentation with the question of ecosystem. And perhaps Mariana, if you want to just present your vision about this ecosystem, is it the same way?
Yes, thank you, Isabelle. I agree with Marc in the fact that territorial ecosystems, I really like this term. I believe it's going to be one of the keys, but I'll develop also in a while. Regarding the value creation in the post-COVID era, I think that COVID has been a moment where we have adapted, a moment to try out new things and to test our resilience faced to change. So I believe it's going to be a good time to accelerate MaaS adoption if and only if we overcome the implementation challenges and barriers. And here is where, as Marc mentioned, the collaboration between public authorities and private sectors are going to be key in order to actually accelerate MaaS in this post-COVID era. I also think that for users, this MaaS could mean another mean to be able to choose the best chain of modes of intermodal trips adapted to the personal needs and requirements in terms of time, health, taking into account their surroundings, their territory, and their economic situation. So I think also that the personalization is a keyword towards an added value for the user in this new era.
Okay, so perhaps we can just exchange, and I will propose to have some question from speakers and from attendees. So perhaps I would like, if you want to ask some question, just raise your hand and I can give you the floor that time. Please, you can go on. Tommaso, you can ask first
Yes,
question.
I will take the privilege of a director of Gerpisa to ask the first question to the roundtable speakers. As an economic sociologist, when I look at markets, I look at it in a very, I have a kind of frame of mind in which I look at who creates the markets. Markets, most of the time, according to strong tradition in economic sociology, are created by producers. So most of the time, modern markets have been created by producers capable of drastically reducing the cost of a certain good, typically the car with Ford, and make it available to a large number of people. And then the market gets a structure. Most of the time, when a market becomes mature, you have few actors who control the markets in different ways. There are different conceptions of control. And so for MaaS, what is difficult for me to grasp is how do you create the value? And of course, you have companies like Uber that seems to have been very successful, but we know also that Uber has created a new market, that's for sure, by making a new type of service. A pre-existing type of service available, but it became much more easier of access and most of the time cheaper than what the taxi were. So that was the business model. But the problem is that Uber is not making money out of that so far. So he has created the market, but not the value. So it's quite a paradoxical situation. Now for MaaS, I'm asking myself, where is the value? Where is from where the operators will take the value from? And I think that most of the value is in what the people do now to move around, which is by using a private car. But here you have a problem in the fact that if you look at household budgets, when people buy relatively old second-hand cars, and that is the average of people around the world that buy 8 years, 5 years on average, well, they have cost, and it represents up to 13% of the total budget of households to the total cost of ownership of a car. But still, in most situations, is the most rational way of assure personal mobility in cities, and in particular in the suburban areas, which represent the main problem, I think, of MaaS. So I think there is a real clash between this model. I buy old cars, I have a garage, I use it every day, and the MaaS as an alternative system. And so in particular, I'm asking both to Marc and to the other speakers. I don't see this model that has been used by the car industry to sell cars to households for more than a century to survive if you really want to move to MaaS, because if MaaS needs to find value, it will need to substitute for the ownership of a car. The other solution is that you don't create value, you just use the transport system that is existing. So there will not be a lot of value, but you make more rational by integrating the private cars in a more rational intermodal system. But then, the perspective of making of this a new business, a new market, I'm not sure that there is a lot of that. So is there an alternative between, MaaS and private owner car are colliding eventually or not? And if they're not colliding, where is the value? So that would be my question.
Do you have a specific speaker?
No, this is open to, if you want to answer, if you feel that you want to win an answer, it's for everybody.
And I would like to propose that could be a lot of answers from speakers because they are coming from various horizons, and perhaps if you want to answer one after the other. Marc, you perhaps, it was first asking about the question of repartition of value along the chain value, and perhaps you could be the first answer, and after Guy, I see.
Okay, where I agree with Tommaso is that, and I will address this question later on, that's very difficult to find a sustainable business model for MaaS. I completely agree with that. And where do you take the value from? I think it's a real question. The second point is when I say that one of the objectives is to reduce pollution, congestion, and also casualties, I think there is a very high importance of regulation. Of course, we have regulation for emission, but we have also banning initiatives. And banning initiatives is not only not to have IC vehicle in city. In certain cases, it's also to ban a particular vehicle from center city. And that's going to suppress, in some areas, one of the most used way of transportation used by people today. If you can't use anymore your car, then you have to move to another way of mobility. And this is where I think that regulation, even if there is no immediate value visible at the time being, is also pushing in this direction.
Okay. Julia, if you want to, perhaps Guy first. I told you about.
Yes, thank you. Perhaps first to give an answer to Tommaso. So I think that the value added is huge for MaaS. And the value added is in particular combining the different means of transport and making them transparent. And this way, it's possible to combine all the means of transport to individual mobility for public transport. And this is then a real alternative to private car. And this is what the city would like to have. And so let's say it is for the general interest and to save external costs in terms of congestions and whatever, the costs are really huge. Now coming to your second question about the private and public transport. So my opinion, we should not separate anymore between private and public, but we should combine both. But I see one huge problem. It is the problem which was raised just before about the ecosystem. So now I'm joining what Marc Alochet said. If we are allowing an ecosystem like we have today with Amazon or some other GAFA companies, they will catch all the added value in their own ecosystem. And this is, for instance, what Uber is trying to do, and then creating a private MaaS and catching the value which is created through these MaaS. So the benefits would be for Uber and not necessarily or less for the society or for the citizens, because the citizen would have less choice. And at the same time, for the automotive industry, of course, it would be a problem as well. But I see also the automotive industry. I'm not saying that we should skip automotive industry or private cars. I just say we should give to the citizen the choice which serves best the general interest. And if we are following this, we can satisfy the customer, the citizen, the citizen and our society, but also the stakeholders.
Thank you. It's time. It's good, Julia, if you want to take the floor.
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting question. So I think that really depends on the region. So for instance, in very dense urban areas, we have different transport services than in suburban areas or rural areas that are profitable to operate. So there we may see some competition between operators, and still I think it's and I think really for suburban areas, it really depends how people provide, like public transport operators or public authorities working with private companies to provide additional services. So in the US, we see a lot of cooperations of Uber with public authorities, assuring transport services for handicapped persons. And really provide another service for these type of population groups that was not available or really in poor quality before in the US. So this situation is completely different in Europe. Huh? So here we will see different collaborations. So for instance, when I just take the example of Reach Now, which is an enterprise of BMW and Daimler, that in some part it really proposes its own MaaS system, for instance in Hamburg, which is competing with the public transport, public MaaS in Hamburg, and in other cities it works on the model B2G, so it proposes MaaS solutions to cities. Another example, it's Moja as well in Hamburg, which is an enterprise from Volkswagen, which proposes public transport on demand for Hamburg. So you see really a lot of different models, but it depends, of course, where can an operator be profitable on its own by proposing services to users, which are very thin margins in the transport sector. So even car sharing and bike sharing systems, so all the diversity of new products that we see, are often subsidized by cities, either by providing free parking options, or they're directly subsidized. So I think it's a value. It's a good question, but and then how are the operators really willing to cooperate with cities? And it's interesting. So in pilots, we see a lot of enterprises participate in pilots, so MaaS pilots. But when it comes to commercial applications, some want to produce their own application. So how far the shareholders and stakeholders are really willing to participate in a fully MaaS system, that really is still a question mark. For instance, yeah, like Reach Now, they participated in pilots, but then want to develop their own MaaS platforms, railroad companies as well. So we see a lot of different ones. So yeah.
Thank you. Perhaps Wa, if you want, in the public, if you want to ask your question.
Hello, I want to share some comments and then some situation in China. According to the typology, we can find that the MaaS in the passenger car industry is at least divided by two categories: the ride-hailing business and the car-sharing business. Inside of the ride-hailing business, you have the C2C model, that is the Uber's model, and the B2C model is the Reach Now, among the others. And then inside of the car sharing, you have the point-to-point business model, as what we usually get in experience, like the Hertz, your car. And then there is also the free-floating business model, like the Car2Go and Zipcar. This is a general situation. To answer the question of the Tommaso, from the company per se, it's not making money. And you see that still there is a huge amount of the money to be injected into those categories of the companies, simply because they are exploring a kind of the network effects. According to the McTaffy's law, the current investment is trying to enlarge the base of the consumers. So create a bigger network will create the square of the number, the squared number of the users. That is the real value they are looking for afterwards. In a situation in China, what we can find that Didi competed to Uber to take finally take the quasi-monopoly situation. And in terms of the B2C market, as you see that Reach Now is not operating successfully. Chinese car makers are making the similar kind of approach, company by company. Then they experience certain kind of a medium success. And the new wave of doing that is to create the alliances among several car makers. For example, the T3 alliance, or the company being established. So again, the network effect is not really important. Counting on one company, it doesn't work, simply doesn't work. Then in China, you can also find a broader vision of looking for towards the future. There are a broader vision of mobility services that is in the early stage of experimentation, including the supersonic train, including the flying cars. in parallel, another topic, which is also in the early stage of the exploration, is in the truck business. You see that during the COVID or even before, the truck business has generated much more emission with low efficiency because the mass in the field of transportation or logistical supply chain part is underexplored. And now there is also kind of a surging awareness about that field, how companies and the companies can work together, create a platform, share the truck information when you load your goods from point A to point B and become empty from point B to another destination, how this information can be shared and be fully explored by another company in this platform. So very quickly, because you know, for if you would like to have more information to read, in fact, I will present my book project on the, I think that the 17th, right, about the Geely. There's the chapter 13. Through the case of the Geely, I try to elaborate a general picture about the MaaS, or the mobility as a service system in China. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps you could just leave the references in the chat.
Okay, I'll try to type because I'm using my mobile phone to get the access. So,
okay. Yeah. Perhaps Adriana, who wanted to divide your thoughts about the question. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much for all the presenters. It was really interesting to discuss mobility as a service. And I thought also, besides the presenters, the comments from Tommaso and Hua Wang were really interesting, especially when we think about the value capture in the MaaS system. I really don't know how it's going to be, because until today, if we consider, public transportation is highly public funded. It depends on subsidies from the state level, from municipalities, especially here in São Paulo, in Brazil, they get a lot of money in order to have tickets affordable for the majority of the population. The city government has to pay for a large amount of the costs. And I'm thinking about when we think about companies like Uber, for example, perhaps they try to compensate all this, the lack of public funding, by squeezing other, especially weaker parts of the chain, of the value chain. For example, the drivers. It's I think it's a huge discussion that we should also consider when we are talking this transformation, this transition to mobility as a service, the role that especially the ride-hailing companies have in the precarization of work conditions. I think it's something that we should really consider, because part of capturing value comes from this exploration of the workers, especially in emergent countries where unemployment is high, like here in Brazil. And it's interesting because this dispute over value capture creates some new businesses as well. We have this exploration of the workers, and here in Brazil is something really weird. There's a lot of companies that are leasing cars for drivers, for Uber and Didi drivers. Didi, the Chinese company, is also a big player here in Brazil with the brand 99 Cars. They have acquired a Brazilian company. And so many drivers here in Brazil, they cannot afford to buy a car, so they have to make a lease for the car to work, so they earn less and less money each month. So I think it's something that we should also consider in this discussion about the value generation and capture in MaaS. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Perhaps I just would like to deepen this question. And what do you think about the question of innovation introduction, technological innovation with, for example, the introduction of a autonomous vehicle in MaaS with a fleet. Perhaps Guy, if you worked on this question.
Yes. Yes. So I think that, like I told you just before, automated vehicles or automated minibuses could be a gap filler, and thus make public transport in cities, but also in rural areas, more convenient and individual. And this way, this is to give a response to Tommaso. This is a real huge additional value. This is something like a revolution, a game changer, and this makes, in fact, MaaS so attractive.
Is there some other comments? Tommaso, it's okay for you?
If I can add a comment quickly. Just regarding the business model and the value creation, our research also approaches MaaS and its inherent ecosystemic functioning as an asset itself for value creation. So that's what we're trying to identify and to prove, that the organizational part of MaaS and the co-production dynamics behind MaaS, which also imply public-private, but just a more broader scale, are an asset to value creation for every stakeholder involved. I wanted to add that. I don't know also at which level, but it'd be important. And as a second point, more specifically talking about what Marc and Guy mentioned, the sustainable value creation in MaaS. We also think that the integration of active modes is going to be key for being able to create an ecosystem where value is created for everyone. We are working on this, and for example, in the global south, where public transport is not as strong or as strong as in European context, it can happen what Adriana mentioned, this ride-hailing overcoming and taking the market and just causing more congestion, etc. So we are trying to identify the strategies to be able to valorize active modes as a part of the business model, so that we actually are creating a sustainable business model out of MaaS.
Thank you. Perhaps Martin, if you want to add some comments.
Yes, am I audible?
Okay.
Okay, great. I was interested in the last comment of Mariana, for whom we are creating the value. So I have some observations. So one would be that when I think about the generation of my parents who are in their 60s, it was really difficult to convince them just to use a smartphone. So I'm wondering if we are introducing those new services that are based on applications, if we are not excluding a lot of current users just because they cannot keep up with the technology that we assume should be used by everyone. And related to that is, I think the case of Moya was mentioned by someone earlier, and they had a trial in my hometown, and one of my sisters is working for the public railway, and they could see in their data that the customers number were going down, and they just sent some people out and asked the people who were using the service why and where they would go and so on and so forth. And they would see that usually the people who use the service are 20-somethings, and they are basically too lazy to go 50 meters to the train station and wait for the MaaS service. So are we really creating like services for the people who need the service, or are we just maybe completely going in the wrong direction by using the newest technologies that we have available, especially when it comes to the question how we connect the customer to the service?
Yeah.
If I can just quickly add a very quickly response to this one. Not a response, but it's a case I like in Vienna, where the Wiener Linien have created this mobility points that are actually physical hubs where users can access this digital part at the same time physical part of the infrastructure as a way to avoid this that you mentioned, Martin, because it is something we must take into account. But there are also, interesting strategies to integrate little by little this digital world we are creating into with physical hubs, for example.
Thank you. Wa, you wanted to react?
Okay, just some quick comments, because we do see that there's no perfect word, and the technology is also trying to resolve those challenges one by one. To answer the question of the comment coming from who? The previous one, talking about the aging people. I personally use the following procedure to help my parents to get the taxi. So in fact, you can use your application to command at a taxi for example, for my father or my mother, who are 7 or 10, whatever, how many kilometers away. And then you will have all the traceability of the itinerary from point A to point B. So the similar things that we have made for our kids, all the kids, he can use the application, and two accounts are interconnected. So as soon as my boy commanded a taxi, immediately I can see a transparent itinerary when he will be on the taxi, and when he will approach home. Interestingly enough, to further reinforce the security issue, as both whatever Uber or Didi has experienced, now Didi has created its specific taxi. So ask for the OEM to produce specific taxi for Didi. From one side, to further improve the experience of the users, and from the other side, second side is to to collect the data for the security of the passengers, and the third one is to collect the data for the improvement of the future R&D for the new car models for the OEM. So it's a kind of the changing business model, and the data is becoming a kind of the asset. The similar thing is for the drivers, whatever trucks, because that also happened. Unfortunately, it always goes through the tragedy first, and then we try to find the result. Workers, the drivers can be overexplored. Sometimes they will feel the fatigue. So in that situation, sensors of different modes can monitor not only by distance, by kilometers, but also detect their health situation. So those are the new technologies are being progressively implemented on the trucks and those MaaS cars, so as to further protect both the workers and the passengers. So at least those are the directions that media has discussed. Industrial players try to provide upgraded solutions to answer those questions.
Thank you. Perhaps, Julia, a short answer, because I would like to begin the round two.
Okay, then I will be very short. So yeah, I really find that interesting, value creation for whom. So most pilots have been taking place, MaaS pilots have been taking place in very urban areas. So our high expectations and goals associated with our MaaS will reduce our pollution, our congestion problem is not at all addressed by the pilots. And so it's different, of course, in France, for instance, where, for instance, we see regional MaaS emerge. Yeah. So, but it's really important to really address this issue. Does it really tackle our congestion pollution problem and the car users? So, so that is providing really an alternative to car users. And what we see in the literature, that loyal car users tend to be very loyal and rarely change their behavior. And that's for, like habits are created, but also because they don't have like really good alternatives. So how could MaaS really help with this? By proposing them intermodal traveling. So we see in the literature, when they change their behavior, they rather switch to intermodal traveling than to completely switch their modes. So if you propose really good parking options, if you prohibit access or make it so expensive that they cannot do one trip only with a car, but they have to combine these modes in a really cost-efficient way, also not only talking about ride-hailing services only accessible for certain income groups, but also like for normal car users in suburban areas, then you really have to integrate these car services. But now also, Mariana, I took your thing for the active mode. So for instance, bike, going with an electric bike, for instance, somewhere. So yeah, that's kind of my short answer.
Thank you. Tommaso, if you want to perhaps to conclude your
I'll have two very quick comments to conclude this round. The first round is following one up with Martin's question about how much inclusive is MaaS. And I think we all noticed that during the yellow jacket movement in France, for some strange reasons, the people in Paris were targeting share mobility, in particular electric share mobility. They burn share bikes, they burn and destroy share electric cars. And that might sound strange, but at the same time, if you look from a class perspective, you can get to the conclusion that most of the green services and green products and the subsidies for these products go to people that really have already a lot of mobility access. And also that all these services are conceived most of the time with the mindset of people living either close to the city or close to their job, or without having to use the car every day to go to the job or to pick up the kids. So perhaps this question of the inclusiveness of MaaS, who is thinking, who is designing MaaS and for whom, might be, I think, an interesting political questions. And the fact that MaaS is on the paper very good and is definitely a progress, but can be seen by the user of the old system that are excluded from mobility service or they are far away from the city centers as a threat or as a political class, different vision of what they do. And the second comment that I make is that what if we have a very serious carbon taxes? I mean, if you make a serious carbon taxes on everything, then MaaS would have a value, because if you tax old cars, if you tax new cars, if you tax everything that is going into the city or going out from the city when it's transported, I mean, if you make a serious carbon tax with a very strong price on the CO2 tons, that would be a game changer, because automatically the value of MaaS will become immediately there. Because if you reduce, improve, you reduce transport, improve the efficiency, that could be the way to go to create value. That would be my comments on and then that would steer up more answer, I guess, is big topic. So let's move to the second round and feel free to react to what just they said when you answer to that.
Thank you, really. It's very interesting, and perhaps we could just deepen this discussion, because you saw that the presentation, the definition, the typology of MaaS are very large, are very general and different. And perhaps if we could integrate the environmental, but social and fiscal impacts, perhaps we could just imagine how we could propose the way that we could create and distribute some value. So I would like for all the speakers that perhaps from your approach, you could speak about the question, what are the drivers for MaaS value creations? Perhaps, is there a business model for MaaS integrating all impacts you cited before? And perhaps I would like to ask Marc to take the floor, if you don't mind.
No, it's okay. First of all, I would like to come back to Guy's comment when he says that there is huge interest for MaaS. And I do agree with him that the promise of MaaS is very exciting. But the key issue is, do we really have value creation, and is there a business model? And coming back as well to what Adriana said about the cost of public transportation, I'm not sure to have the exact figure, but in the region of Paris, I think we only pay for 25% of the cost of the ticket when we take a bus or a tramway or a tram or so on. So there is a huge difference between how much does it cost to public authorities and how much do we pay for using the service. So the question of value creation and business model is very important. If I go back to my favorite topic, which is automakers, the first point is that automakers are already involved in mobility service. Of course, they sell multi-purpose cars to chauffeurs for Uber, for instance, taxi companies, rental car companies. And as these vehicles are no different than the ones they sell in B2C, there is no real drawback to their operation. But will automakers be key actors of MaaS? Do they have a chance to do that? And basically, I think they have three main options. They can keep the same business model and sell cars to mobility operators, like FCA and Jaguar Land Rover sell cars to Waymo. Waymo would turn them into robotaxi and operate them. And then they would become commodity suppliers to mobility operator, which is what I call the white good nightmare. They can also move one step further and sell cars and also mobility service platform, as explained and proposed by Toyota. They can also operate a strategic pivoting and become mobility operator, such as General Motors or Honda, via their common subsidiary Cruise. This would represent a considerable gap from the current business when even previous items such as car rental has not worked out so well. Is there a sustainable business model for automaker in MaaS? As everybody knows, this is a volume industry with relatively low margin, except for luxury and premium. So do they have a chance to scale up and make profit? What are their options? In terms of technology, they can choose robotaxi. And it has been said, it reduces operating costs because you can suppress the chauffeur, which is highest cost. That's true. But developing robotaxi is very expensive. Final tuning is much more complicated than expected. And global scale-up is far from granted. Technology, again, when incumbents are lagging far behind Tesla and NIO, which have taken the lead with innovative electronic architecture designed to connectivity and software updates, which are two main enablers of future MaaS. Lastly, automakers don't have the skills to manage cooperatively this deployment of mobility system with public authorities due to their B2C business culture. And the question is, will automakers be able to impose transposable, transversal solution between territories with different geography, culture, history, social, or even political positioning, as they do when they sell multi-purpose vehicles worldwide? Consequently, I think that for car automakers, if they have a chance to find a business model, they need to engage with other actors in ecosystem mobility. And this is probably one of the best options, if there is one.
Thank you. Julia, if you would to speak up, please.
So, yeah, I think the value preparation, again, we really come from the regulatory perspective here from my research project a little bit. And I just want to point out MaaS is an opportunity or as a tool to plan and convey transport policies. So MaaS generates, so if we have MaaS platforms and users actually use this tool, it actually really generates a lot of data on transport offer, transport on mobility behavior. And this could be used by public authorities to better plan transport options, to better plan and adopt offers, but also to really see what's going on in their cities. I mean, we had this overflow of electric kick scooters that were placed a little bit everywhere in cities, and then we had this MaaS tool would diffuse this information about vehicle status, about origin destination trips that were made, about congestion area, and would allow public authorities to better manage their mobility services and enforce also rules. It could be also, so that is a very positive here, perspective, but what are the opportunities? It could be also a tool to convey transport policy. So, and I would like to just cite an interesting initiative from the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. They started a process to harmonize data. So that was also initiated a little bit of this electric kick scooter overfloating that were placed in public space everywhere. So they require vehicle operators to, via an API, to deliver information about vehicle status, origin destinations, and actually trips made. And it's actually a huge project. And they have another IPA where they convey their transport policy. So the access of vehicles to certain areas. They can do dynamic pricing of the tariffs to, for instance, limit the access of TNCs, or like they are called in the US, or taxi services to certain areas, make them more expensive, and maybe subsidize indirectly underserved areas for taxi services, for instance. Or they can do public management through it by highlighting places where you can park your car or your vehicle or not. And of course, MaaS could be used to provide incentives through combined offers. So if you use public transport, you can use for free park and ride facilities, which are kind of sometimes very competitive. So if you don't arrive in the morning, you don't find a parking spot, etc. So these are really real-term real problems for car users, for instance, maybe switch to another mode. So I just wanted to very quickly, or just also maybe interesting MaaS for residents. So this is kind of what Mariana mentioned a little bit, approach that we see a lot in Germany and Austria. So develop mobility stations and hubs. And that could be also, we could also think about it, MaaS at residential places, combining with the mobility of packages and merchandises, and so packages, for instance. And I just wanted to just point out the proposal of Tommaso to introduce a carbon tax. But then you have you have to figure out the social problem, right? Because people, Paris is such a good example. It's just so expensive to live in the city in Paris. So residential location choices and mobility are not independent from each other and have to think together. So you cannot just oblige, it would be very profitable and very beneficial for urban people who are higher income households. So we have to think the social question with it. And some maybe, I think what also Marc mentioned at the beginning, that it's interesting because it's really a common fear, never mind the operator or stakeholder, you feel the loss of having direct contact to your client. So this is really a big issue. So why should an enterprise collaborate Like, and that is the same for a public transport operator or for a private company. They want to keep the direct contact with the client. So, and that is a barrier that you have to overcome, that you have to negotiate in contracts, which takes really a lot of time. So that's kind of just a barrier that I wanted to point out. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps Guy, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Isabelle. So I see, in fact, three drivers for MaaS value creation. The first one, and the most important, is positive economy. So this means commons, the creation of commons through open data. So using all the open data make it possible to have to use the complementarity of different means of transport. And the second point is when it's combined with artificial intelligence, for instance, you can enable continuous improvement and self-learning mobility systems, and this is completely new. And then to give also an answer to Marc before about the business model. So to my personal opinion, this will be the new business models. So to work on this, so we are speaking about business models. Think about Amazon. So Amazon is making money with data and not with selling things. So they are selling services, data services, and this is financing the rest. They are using the rest for catching the people in their ecosystem. Then the second point, beyond the commons, the second driver, very important driver, and you can see this with Fridays on Future, is that we can enable less pollution and reduce externalities. So this means that we are using less resources, we have less pollution, particulate matter, congestions, and so on. And the latest one, perhaps the most important, is that we could fulfill better the needs of the citizen to a cheaper price. And this is in particular very important when we see the problems of the yellow jackets, which was raised by Tommaso. So to my opinion, if we are increasing the carbon tax, if we are taking the real price for mobility, we will have, even in Germany, I'm sure, yellow jackets, because the price would be so high for mobility that it is not possible. And to my opinion, I prefer something like MaaS, where I can improve the mobility and this way change the habits of the people. And we can to show how high is the potential. We have made a representative survey in Lyon, and one result of this is that 50% of the car owner are ready to give up their car if they have public transport or something like a MaaS, which has an individual car. And so this way, I think it could be beneficial for everybody, and this is for me the best driver.
Thank you. Perhaps Mariana, if you have a complementary idea about this question of a driver for MaaS creation, value creation.
Yes, thank you, Isabelle. Just to not forget, I totally agree about the role of data, which was mentioned by Guy. And I would have the question, but who's to profit and how to regulate this, right? So I would find interesting the case of France and the licence mobilité that are structuring the use of open data to avoid unfair situations. So that would be interesting to follow. And also, as a response to what Marc was saying about the evolution of the business models of car manufacturers, and how maybe the question is not if they can, but are they willing to become providers of commodities? That would be more of the question. So I had that in mind. And regarding the drivers of value for MaaS, I think they definitely depend and change throughout the actors of the ecosystem. So the analysis, we could start it from the co-created value from all of them in use towards, for example, for users is the ease of access, the centralized payment, and for national authorities is a better comprehension of territories, the practices of users, etc. Even for car manufacturers to be like mobilizing the vehicles and exploring the possibility of charging infrastructure to get a value. But we could also see it from the perspective as that the main driver of value should be sustainability and aligning to the goals of sustainable development, to be able to tackle all the economical, social, environmental issues. How? I think that's our job to define and to create the right strategies to do so. So on our way.
Thank you. Perhaps we could just begin the discussion, and I propose to operate as the same for the round one. So please ask your question raising your hand, and perhaps if you want to address your question for one specific speaker, just precise. So you can, speakers are allowed to ask some question if you want.
I will start again.
Yeah.
I have a question, or perhaps there is, I have a question about the role of data, because I understand that data can create value, but under certain conditions. There's no doubt that Amazon is capable of selling to companies a capacity of making their advertisement extremely efficient, because they help them to figure out to whom they can sell products and to which volumes at which prices. So this is a big power that you have, and you can sell it to private companies and you make your services. So this business model can work. But for Uber, for example, he has a lot of data, but I'm not sure if they sell to somebody. I know that they're sharing with some cities, because the cities basically told them, if you want to operate in this city, you give the data to me. And I understand that public regulators can make a use of the data of a company like Uber generates. But I understand that they have a lot of data, but I don't see what Uber could do rather than trying to sell to public regulators in terms of business model. So I understand that data can generate value, but here I do not see yet what the other than the public regulator that can use this data to betterly plan urban mobility, see which people move from A to B, and what all the Julia just said about the use of this data through common platform. I don't see how you could sell to other private companies in order to make a value of that. So that's the kind of question, is that the data is not always, I mean, you have data and then you have to figure out how to make a value out of that. This is the job of the people who monetize. You know, there is a concept, a startup, they start a business, they lose a lot of money, and then they hire people to monetize what they have. And sometimes they manage, sometimes they don't. So I was wondering about, do you have a better idea of how you monetize this data that is generated, and understand that you can create value for mobility? This is good for the cities, this is good for the users, but how do you really make profits out of that?
Okay, thank you. Marc, there is a lot of question in your intervention. Perhaps Marc, you can begin.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer about this question of data on digitalization. Obviously, data are going to simplify the life of the customer. I mean, if I can pay with my smartphone just once when I take the bus, when I take a plane and so on, my life is going to be much easier. But what we are dealing with is how we can deal with the issues of pollution, congestion, and casualties. And this is a question of industry operation, no doubt about that. And we don't, what I fear somehow is that talking about data and digitalization, we just forget that we need to find other ways of mobility, how to make people moving from one point to another one. What are they going to use? A car, a bus, a bicycle? Are they going to work and so on? How to organize? What is the governance of this new mobility system? And of course, data may be very helpful, could simplify things, but are not going to provide the solution. And the second point is that, okay, we say that Amazon makes money with data. I'm sure Amazon is making a lot of money with cloud operation, no doubt about that. They are the first one, I think, in the world making money with that. But do they really gain value from the use of data? I know that many studies have been done on the automotive industry, and it's very, very difficult to get some gain from the use of data, because the first point is the different users, car maker, but not only car makers, authorities and so on, have to agree on a standard. What are the data we want to share? Are we really ready to share data? And you have also the question of privacy. I mean, as a customer, do I want to share my data during my journey? I'm not sure I would like to do that. So that was my first point about data. And the second point is about inclusiveness. And on one point, I agree with what Tommaso said. Some studies says that in the 10, 15 years to come, about 40% of users will have second-hand cars because they are constrained. They don't have the choice to buy new electric cars, which are very expensive. Usually, they live in rural areas or suburban areas, and it's very difficult for them to run their budget. And they only can afford to buy a second car. So where are we talking in terms of inclusiveness? Who are going to be the real customers? And the same study says it's about 15–20% of what is called the new mobility user. People who are ready, of course, of using this new mobility system because they live in the center of city and they have to deal with very different issues as someone who is living in a suburb area, who has no public transport to take his children to school, go to work, and so on. So inclusiveness is a real question, and I think we have to consider the different situation of the different user of mobility system. And probably if we do that, we'll see that there are many different types of mobility needs, and there is not one single solution. So inclusiveness is probably a key to make MaaS efficient. And the second point, Tommaso, I just don't really agree with you when you say that, okay, we have to increase the carbon tax. But if you increase the carbon tax, people who are constrained, how are they going to move? Do they have a chance to buy a car and move? Do they have a chance to take a taxi or the bus and move? That was at the very beginning of the story of the yellow gilet in France.
Thank you. Julia, if you want to complete.
So concerning the data issue, so how can you generate value with data operations? So you can link it to other products, right? So Uber is generating profit mainly with the delivery, of now, particularly in the COVID crisis, but with the delivery of restaurants of foods. And it would be interesting how you can, of course, this is not, does it really improve accessibility? I would put that in question. So does it really solve our mobility issue? I'm not sure. It only would solve our mobility issue if you would align the mobility of packages, which increased a lot in the COVID crisis, and people, so internet business is going up as well. So if you would align this freight mobility for persons to their own mobility, and use it more efficiently. And then you could use this data as well too, because it's very expensive to just deliver a parcel. Like I think like a delivery person goes from Amazon, goes maybe twice to a household until a package is delivered. It's very expensive. So if you could optimize this, that would be a way. But still, if you have like, I would also recommend that if you just, from a regulatory perspective, just oblige people to share their data, it doesn't mean it comes in a good quality and it's really usable. So I hear that a lot of from public transport authorities on the regional level, yeah, that work with other public transport authorities and on the local level, and still they have to do a lot of work to clear up the data. So yeah, so it's also expensive to harmonize and standardize the data. That's also the thing.
Thank you. Guy, if you can take the floor.
Yes, thank you. So I would like to give some examples. I'm trying to answer Tommaso. So of course, you have raised that the public transport authorities are very much interested in having these data to better plan and or to give better make better licensing and so on. But I think I would like to give you the example of our project. So the public transport operator using automated vehicles are very much interested in knowing when in making something like tracking and tracing, and to see which are the disturbances, so the incidents and the accidents of automated vehicles, and they are buying these data from the OEMs. So the OEMs are selling these services and these data to the public transport operator, and then they can conclude if they have to change something on the in the city infrastructure, or change something, so they can make a conclusion or change the trail or whatever. And a third example is about the selling of the lift to Toyota a few weeks ago. So they were selling lift for $850 million of dollars to Toyota, but the main value is not the technology. The main value is the data from these vehicles, automated vehicles driving in the city, so like Tesla. So in fact, having these information that can improve, let's say, the artificial intelligence and their algorithm to improve the security of automated vehicles. So you can see you can make a lot of money with this, and these are just a few examples, ideas. When we have these data, I'm sure that like Amazon, Uber, whatever, they will find a lot of new ideas to make money with it.
Thank you. Do you think that insurance companies could benefit from the data too, or it could be a very dangerous with the legal policy, the regulatory policies?
Are you asking me or?
Oh, you answered all the question. Insurance company, you didn't mention it. Perhaps it's not a good idea. Perhaps it's not usually the case.
Yes, so I'm quite sure that data will be used for insurance companies, and already yet for automated vehicles. So if they are opening data, they can have, for instance, lower prices for insurance.
So you see, there is
it's an ethical problem also. So I think it will be easier, for instance, in the United States than it could be in Europe.
Mm. Okay. Is there some other comments? Some other questions? No.
If I can just say that we are reaching the end of the plan. I mean, the planned time. So perhaps, I mean, if there are no other questions, we can close the roundtable that I think was a very live, with a lot of questions and exchanges, and very interesting. And we have to keep in mind that some of our listeners are really about to go to lunch, others are about to go to sleep. So this can be a little bit complicated in terms of logistics. So I would really like to thank all the participants, and Isabelle also in particular, for having not only moderate, but really organize and help us to conceive all these templates for this roundtable that has worked very well, because I think the questions were stimulating and the answers were really interesting. And we've seen a lot of different points of view, and how much MaaS is a very exciting concept, but also with a lot of different realities and problems. I think we have highlighted a lot of them. So thank you very much for this great debate. This is the final session for today. So for those who are still with us, we've been seeing the number going down. We convene tomorrow at the same time for parallel sessions, and you're invited to join us, as the conference is fully free and available through Zoom or live YouTube. Okay, so thank you again, and I virtually applaud all of you.
Thank you for.
Thank you, everyone.
And
Thank you.
Thank you for Tommaso Pardi from Gerpisa and Jacob Puschinger from Anthropolis for this organization. It was very, very interesting. Thank you. And
thank you again to the Anthropolis chair, of course, that has been our partner in organizing that.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.